All right. How are you doing, Rahul?
Doing
Welcome
very
to
well. How are things at your end?
Really well. Welcome to AWS Made Easy. Ask Us Anything, episode number 35.
Great.
Oh,
Wasn't last week 35?
no. I misnumbered it. It was 30.
Okay.
So,
For a second, I thought last week was 35, and then maybe we forgot to update it this time.
no.
That's good to
This
know.
is 35. Last week was 34. Hey, but that's great. That's a good problem to have. We've done so many, losing count. We actually had a little
Great.
bit of snow here in Seattle.
I heard Austin has snow, which is, in the middle of Texas. And then Seattle, of course, been really chilly. Uh, on the other hand, here in Chennai, we've been having awesome weather. It's nice and pleasant, and I think somewhere around 25 or 26 degrees centigrade. So, yeah, I'm not complaining.
Oh, fun. That's it's cold here, and it's cold by Seattle standards. How was your weekend?
Weekend was awesome. This weekend, we had a lot of friends over, our usual get togethers, and yeah, had a lot of fun. I had a lot of prep work to do. So, the reason I'm just jumping in, literally like 30 seconds before this this live stream was starting, I was at the FinOps board meeting, and I couldn't be more excited about the FinOps org and all the stuff that they're doing. So, yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about that as we go through this live stream. But for those of you who don't know FinOps or are interested in cost savings, are interested in understanding how to deal with and navigate your organizations and your cloud spend through, whether you're spending on AWS or Google or Azure, doesn't matter. It's vastly different from what you do on-prem. The FinOps org is really, really trying hard to educate and bring a lot of the best practices to all the practitioners in the cloud, so that they can navigate this really complex setup when it comes to costs, when it comes to operational mechanics, and so on. So go look up FinOps. There's an amazing event coming up in San Diego in June called FinOps X. And it's a 3-day event over there. Come join us over there. There are going to be a bunch of other meetups and road shows and a bunch of things all over the world through 2023. Go to the nearest one if you can to learn more, to get educated. We're trying to help a lot of folks get more savvy about the cloud, get more savvy about how to manage costs in the cloud, get educated in that. And for a lot of you who have unfortunately lost your jobs very recently, this might be one of the ways to upskill yourself as well. There's a lot of new learning. Everyone is moving to the cloud. That's where all the future is. It might help you to get current with some of these skills that are in real short demand. In real short supply. There's such a high demand for these across all the organizations. But I think the number of, we were just discussing, the number of certified FinOps professionals across the world is less than 10,000. So there's a huge opportunity to learn, upskill yourself, and kind of make yourself a little more relevant to the current job market.
It's amazing thinking about FinOps, right? In a sense, it's saying how much does it cost to run your operation in a way that actually maps back to your infrastructure.
Correct. It's at the end of the day, it's basically making sure that you get the most value for the money that you spend in the cloud. And that is a discipline, right? When you talk about finance in general, when you deal with an entire business, the finance organization has mastered over the last 150 years how to organize all the data, the resources, all of that stuff, and how to look at all of it in a standard P&L, in your standard, financials, to look at how to evaluate where you stand, what you should do, and what decisions you should make. And I think of FinOps as trying to bring that discipline to an area where the whole field is relatively new. I'd say 90% of the practitioners of the cloud have kind of adopted it in the last 3 to 5 years. And then, it's growing at an exponential rate. The number of best practices, the number of experiences are really far, few and far between. So for those who have the experience, we are bringing it all into the FinOps Foundation, trying to build some standards, trying to build some frameworks that folks can use to better, um, I guess, better educate themselves with everything that's going on, and as well as be better informed to make the right decisions.
Absolutely. I got a chance to meet the many of the FinOps folks in Portland, and I'll be meeting some in March coming up in Seattle, or actually next week in Seattle. And
Yep. Seattle is
been
next week.
really, it's been really great to get to know them. There's a lot of high quality content coming up, and most importantly, really great people behind it who are Rahul and the other governing board members and other members of the FinOps Foundation who are making all this content and setting these standards that are going to be the basis for how to talk about your cloud costs for years to come.
Exactly. Awesome. Okay, so I think I derailed the show.
No,
because this was on the agenda. But I was just so excited, from the meeting I just had. Couldn't be more excited about the way the organization is developing, growing, and the reach that it's having. So a lot of exciting stuff to be announced as well. So looking forward to all of that.
Well,
great.
I have something kind of fun to share. I've been working on a I don't know if this popped up on your LinkedIn yet. I just posted this. So I've been working on a blog post about EFS and doing a deep dive into EFS intelligent tiering, learning how that works. And I've been using ChatGPT to kind of as a research assistant to kind of rephrase things. We talked about this recently. You can type into ChatGPT, rephrase, take a sentence and rephrase it in a certain way. It's great for saying, look up this subject and compare this versus that. Compare S3 intelligent tiering versus EFS intelligent tiering. And again, recognizing the limitations. It's not a true artificial intelligence, but it is good at finding these patterns. But some of the fun I've been having is getting it to write limericks and poetry. I'll share this on the screen. You can really have a lot of fun. Let me put up my ChatGPT window and share this on the screen. So one of the things I tried to do, I said, write a beatnik poem about Amazon EFS. And it came out so well.
You got to perform this.
Yes. So actually, hold on. Before we go on, Jeff just said, talked about FinOps here. FinOps would be an interesting career choice since it requires two very distinct skill sets, one technical and one more finance-oriented. The pool of people who can and want to do both is pretty small.
I couldn't agree more. I think the pool of people who can currently do this is small, but I also believe that it's a skill that can be learned. It is a practice and it is a discipline. Like once you learn the framework and you can get yourself disciplined to execute it in a consistent way, I think it goes a long way to build up that skill. Most skills in tech and management and all are learned skills. They come from a lot of practice. They come from a lot of failures. They come from structure, or they get enhanced with structure. So I think if you learn more about FinOps, you learn more about that discipline, and if you're capable of executing it, then I think it's an amazing career choice at this point.
And looking at the what Jeff said in terms of two distinct skill sets, or I always picture these Venn diagrams, and you want to have the intersection be valuable and small, and that's a great way to position yourself. And it's almost like learning two different languages, right? There's the cost-oriented language, and then there's the cloud-oriented vocabulary, and being able to talk to these two different groups.
Correct. I mean, I think like I said last week, the reality is that finance has had a certain different kind of control over the business in the past. And now that everything is on-demand consumption, they really feel less in control about how to manage finances and costs and stuff like that. Procurement has a completely different role to play now compared to what they used to. And so they have to find their footing. They have to find a new place for themselves in this new, very cloud-oriented world. And lastly, engineering has to develop these new skills about being aware of costs and knowing what they spend. And I think the well-architected framework goes a long way in giving you a framework to ask all the right questions and being able to frame your answers so that it all makes sense. But again, it's a discipline. It's not a one-off thing. One of the things that I keep telling people, everything that you do with with FinOps and the cloud is nonstop. You can never none of it is a one-time thing. Whether it is getting cost efficiencies, whether it is making sure your FinOps practices are in place, all of it is a nonstop exercise. You have to be on top of it all the time. And so it's evolving dramatically. It is changing. There are a lot of new things coming up all the time. So it becomes important to stay on top of all of this stuff.
I really like what you said. It's a continuous thing. The analogy I use is just like fitness, right? You can't have one big workout and say, all right, I'm healthy now. That's it. It's a continual thing because the context changes, the situation changes, and then the normal trend of cloud infrastructure is to grow. And
Correct.
Yeah, and you'd like the engineers to always think about cost first, but just sometimes you're just trying to get things done quickly. And then just like AWS, often they release one service like S3 standard, and they'll say, okay, we can have a reduced version like S3 and frequent access, and then S3 intelligent tiering comes later. And so learning how to have different levels of granularity that have different costs, different trade-offs, right? It's important to be able to speak those languages of both finance and cost and tech and infrastructure. And so being able to be positioned to speak about all of those concurrently, that's demand for that's only going to go up.
Completely agree.
All right. Well, I wanted to get back to where I was. Let me put this back on the screen. So I told GPT to write a beatnik poem about EFS. And it came out, it was pretty good. I said, add 2 stanzas about intelligent tiering. And then write 2 stanzas about data storage costs getting out of control. And then it's really fun. You can go back and forth with it and then say, and again, it's not perfect. You have to correct it sometimes. So I said, instead of machine learning, say lifecycle management. So I want to present a performance of this poem. It's going to take 60 seconds. So here goes. Let's see. Oh, 1 second. Sometimes StreamYard, if you leave a video partially shared for too long, it stops. So give me 1 second to reshare that. Recents. There we go. Okay. Amazon EFS, a cloud-born beast. Data stored, ready for a feast. No more local disks, just infinite space. For data big and small, it all has a place. But storage costs, they spiral high, out of control, up to the sky. Budgets overrun, profits take a hit. Data storage seems like a never-ending pit. The need for more, it does not cease. Data grows like flour and yeast. Storage costs, they escalate so fast, it's a problem that just can't last. EFS intelligent tiering, a marvel of design, cost optimization of a higher kind. No more manual tiering, no need to fuss. Lifecycle management takes care of that for us. From cold data to hot and fast, AWS makes it all last. For your data access, make sure to request intelligent tiering, truly one of the best.
That is awesome. That's got to be posted now.
Thanks. I had a lot of fun. Well, I mean, ChatGPT came up with all these great rhymes. I have to use it. So I did a few of the swaps. I came up with the growing like flour and yeast.
That is phenomenal. That is really awesome.
Thank you.
Oh, what a way to lift up the show.
So here, I'll post the link to the linked post in the comments. That was a lot of fun. Well, I wanted to do a segment on kind of summarizing the month in review. So I'll put this up on the screen, some summary statistics. And I did a behind the scenes live stream yesterday where I was kind of playing with making this summary statistics. So I'll put a link to that as well. That was kind of fun. That was just playing with different plotting code and querying the AWS RSS feed. Okay, let me put this on the screen here. Add to stream. There we go. So we have the what's new with AWS 2023. So this is the RSS feed for Amazon. And then as a quick aside, I always get a little bit of a grin with RSS. Well, I don't know if you know one of my dad's one of Jeff's projects a long time ago was making an RSS reader.
Yep.
And then we've got the
you talked about it even on our show.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Yeah, Carmen's headline viewer, a great little Visual Basic headline viewer. It was pretty cool. It's always get a little bit of a grin seeing RSS is still a backbone technology of the internet and moving moving articles around. And so Amazon has their what's new with AWS, and then they publish an RSS feed. So I wrote a little bit of Python code in my stream yesterday that just showed how you can query the RSS feed and then do some really simple plots. So first of all, looking at all the titles that came out, I just did a word cloud of the titles of the last, well, we had 134 articles in January. So about more than 3 a day. That's a lot, a lot of coming out. Ro, how do you react to this this word cloud?
I think mentally, I'm trying to kind of take out Amazon and AWS from this entire, setup. I think the availability, the thing that comes or that stands out for me is the number of new services that kind of expanded across regions. Form a large majority of them. Middle East, UAE, kind of those kind of places seem to have got a lot more of the services that were earlier available primarily in the US regions or some in Europe. And yeah, that out of all of this, that stands out the most, I think, for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I was surprised at the East UAE and UAE, Middle East. That makes sense as they bring more and more services into those regions. We've got Asia Pacific there. So that's really exciting, seeing the services fan
Just
out.
the fact that it is now available just implies that there's a service now that just got expanded over to another region. I'd actually be really interested in seeing a version of this, and maybe we can bring it up next week. Taking out the outliers. So Amazon, AWS, now available, like take those out, and then like take out the new launches in terms of the specific services, like which ones shine or which ones seem to have most traction. I was actually surprised to not see Connect in here, because just from the last few months, like we've seen Connect almost every week. There's been an announcement about Amazon Connect and some feature being added to it. I was just surprised to not see that in this
So I looked at the products mentioned in 2023 in the last month, and Connect didn't come up to the extent that I would have thought.
Yeah, I think they went full steam ahead in 2022, and kind of Jan 2023 they didn't have that many announcements.
Yeah, if anyone deserves a restful January, it's them. But lots of EC2, lots of machine learning and SageMaker. Kendra came up, SageMaker. And so how this works, and I think what I'll do, I'll publish the code for this analysis, and we can just iterate on that as we go. But yeah, the glue came up, the number of mentions of 3 times. And so how this works is in the XML, there's tags for product and also for marketing. So this is the marketing tags here. So top one, and then again, we had to filter out GovCloud. GovCloud gets tagged and everything. Compute, artificial intelligence, databases, storage, analytics, EC2.
It seems fairly evenly spaced out. I mean, compute being the foundation, I kind of ignored that one. But if you look at all the other services or all the other major services where you see spend, It seems quite well balanced. By the way, one insight in most of the cost reports that we look at, we find EC2 or compute being the largest spend. We find storage being the second largest spend. And there I would split it between, I'd say S3, sorry, EBS has the second largest spend, and S3 usually ends up being the third largest spend. Across, I think we've seen hundreds, if not thousands of customers, and over hundreds of thousands of accounts that we run through.
Now, which one do you find has more slack in it? Is it more in EBS or more in storage or more in compute?
I think compute has the most wastage and the greatest potential for savings. Unfortunately, it is the hardest because anything that you right size or you try to, actually, there are two problems with compute. Number one is to figure out what the right size for your computers is incredibly complex because it's across multiple dimensions. It's not just look at your CPU utilization, memory utilization, and say, okay, hey, this is just hardly using 5% CPU, so let me just downsize. That's not how it works. Because of the way performance is determined on every EC2 instance, it's a combination of your compute, so your CPU utilization, your memory utilization, then it is your network I/O, and then your disk I/O. Now, depending on how you downsize, all those 4 parameters might change. And so you really need to understand how those 4 play with your application.
And you might...
Memory is the particularly tricky one.
Yeah.
For 2 reasons. Number one, because you need an agent to be installed inside the instance, you have to do it yourself. AWS can't inject it in automatically while you launch an instance. So that is one metric that has to be captured by an agent and then sent separately to CloudWatch. So there's an extra step and extra effort that's involved on that front. The second part of it is that there are applications that will use up just about any amount of memory you give it, especially Java applications. Like Java applications have this tendency to take up all the memory you can give it. Databases are another classic example. Databases will use whatever memory you will give it. That's their job. They'll try to get as much of the storage in memory and then access it as fast as possible. So it's very hard to figure out what the performance of your application or your solution is going to be when you downsize it by half the CPU or to the next lower tier. So that's why it's really, really hard. But I do know for a fact that the potential for optimization there is tremendous. On the other hand, storage is way easier because the number of dimensions you have to control or look at and analyze is much simpler. And S3 gets even easier because AWS, like we've said, I don't know how many times now, AWS does all the heavy lifting for you. They built intelligent tiering. All you have to do is just turn on the lifecycle rules and just let it organize it and optimize it for you automatically.
I think we're going to have another poem about S3 intelligent tiering to go along with this one. Yeah,
I think it's got to become a segment on the show now.
Absolutely. All right. This is going to be a lot of fun. Yeah, no, I completely agree. That's an interesting analysis. All right. Well, wrapping up the 2023. So again, 134 articles. That's 134 over 31 days. That is an average of 4.3 announcements per day. So it just goes
on track for 1,500 for the year.
So we will do our best. I wish we could review 4 a day, 4.5 a day. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll catch up to that. But I think we'll be happy to do our deep dive into the ones that are most relevant. Because again, some of them are announcements that are expansions into regions or things that are somewhat esoteric to a particular one. So we want to filter that out for you and show you the ones that are going to have immediate impact.
Correct.
Well, with that being said, should we jump into our first segment, which is going to be Open Search Serverless?
Yep, let's do that.
Okay, I'm going to trigger the transition now. Okay, let's put this back on the screen. There we go. OpenSearch Serverless now generally available. Now, OpenSearch Serverless, this got announced, I believe, at reInvent, but now it's got the general, now it's completely generally available. OpenSearch, now that's their fork of Elasticsearch, streamlines the process of running petabyte scale search and analytics workloads without having to configure, manage, or scale OpenSearch clusters. So get back to what you said about Java applications taking a lot of memory. OpenSearch and Elasticsearch is a large Java application, and
Correct.
having to set this up yourself is cumbersome. Having to know how much resources to give it, all of that. That's a real challenge to do. I mean, it's a really, really neat product. You can do these really fun natural text searches. It's worth learning if you're putting up a site. Learn OpenSearch, but not having to deal with the infrastructure behind it. That is pretty exciting.
Correct. I think most people don't understand the pain of resharding your previously Elasticsearch and the non-serverless OpenSearch versions being able to to need to reshard it or reorganize all your indexes. It's a huge pain and a huge overhead, and I'm really glad that the serverless solution came about, where you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It gets taken care of, and just scaling up for a lot of folks. There are some services, to be very honest, like there's usually a lot of use of Elasticache, Elasticsearch, or OpenSearch in this particular case, and databases, where these are services that you need to keep running, but you don't know how to scale. And invariably, everyone ends up over provisioning them. Okay. I love Aurora Serverless for a simple reason that it will scale up or down in half ACU increments, depending on what load you have. So if I have no load on my database for 8 hours a day, I pay the minimum. I think it comes down to like 1.5 ACUs, I think, is the minimum. I forget what the number is for that. But the usage goes down to the minimum required ACUs. And I'm not keeping these large beastly machines up and running all the time, right? So unless you have a workload which is just constant, just constantly hammering all day, all night on these services, doesn't make sense. The other strategy that makes a lot of sense with these kind of applications, which are basically data stores, I think of OpenSearch also like a database. For these applications, multi-tenancy, especially for non-critical workloads, makes so much sense. If you've got serverless and then you pack on multi-tenancy onto it, where you can, instead of having really crazy peak loads, you can stabilize the loads by having a number of completely different and erratic workloads of their own. It's like, when you have a lot of different, it's like a bunch of different sine waves kind of packed into, a relatively flat wave to create a system like that. But that's something that we use extensively with our Aurora databases.
So the idea is if you have lots of different products that have different use cases, and say one might be popular in Europe, one might be popular in Asia Pacific, one might be popular in the US. So they're each experiencing different load peaks at different times. And so, like you said, with the different sine waves, as you add them together, they all average out. And so
they average out and become pretty flat to look at. And that way you have more consistent, it becomes easier to predict what your costs are going to be, right? And then you can decide how to right size your instances if you're not doing serverless for whatever reason. If you decide to have an instance that you manage yourself, then it becomes way easier to right size those instances. And you can also have, in the case of non-serverless, you can have better machines that are available for that kind of, for that kind of workloads. So it's kind of a win if you do that with these kind of data stores. But I would still say serverless is something you should absolutely look at. Okay, not everyone has a whole lot of workloads for each one of these databases. The simplest thing to do is move to serverless, leverage it, use it for whatever you consume. It's the best way to keep controls over your costs.
Well, especially for some, with the multi-tenancy argument, especially for something really small, right? I'd love to have Elasticsearch indexing, I don't know, a personal website or personal blog where even the fixed cost is a little bit more that I'd be willing to pay. But if there's already one running, the marginal cost of adding in my, couple of tens of thousands of words is pretty low relative to what it's already doing. And so being able to have it's not just about the consumption smoothing, but it's opening it up to sites where the marginal cost wasn't worth it. It was on its own.
Exactly. I mean, look at every dev instance, right? If every developer were to create their own OpenSearch instance in AWS and then start, putting in a tiny little load to run their tests, that just doesn't make any sense. You much rather have one centralized instance where you can kind of run it like a multi-tenant setup. I mean, we do this with Aurora quite extensively, and I've talked about it, at multiple different forums. When it comes to developer instances or developer databases, we pack in anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 schemas in a single Aurora instance, and it works beautifully. One provisioning an Aurora instance or a database literally takes a couple of seconds because you don't have to bring up an entire instance and get the DNS, all of that, all of that stuff. All we do is create a new user, using API and make that available to any client that requires it. They use it for a minuscule, like developers' use of databases compared to the overheads of actually running the database are abysmally low. So they literally just start, dump 10 tables or use DDL to kind of set up 10 tables in the schema, dump minuscule amounts of data into it, do a few read-write tests, and they're done. And for that, to think about the overhead of starting an entire Aurora cluster, waiting for it to boot up, waiting for it to assign IP addresses, stuff like that, create a proxy for it, and then start accessing it. I mean, it's an overkill.
It is funny with that tendency we have as developers to look at, we have a pattern that we want to use. Oh yeah, we need connection pooling, we need redundancy. Like, wait, this could have run off of a Raspberry Pi.
Correct.
Right? This is my personal website that doesn't have a ton of traffic. But we have that pattern. And that serves us well, right? It's good to have patterns, it's good to be able to generalize. But like you said, often the consumption are of these tiny little databases. So good to be able to smooth those out.
Okay.
We'll get back to OpenSearch. So we're very excited that this is now generally available, and it still is going to expand to multiple regions. It's in 8 regions.
Yep.
How do we rate this as an announcement?
So let me definitely say simplifies. So anything that goes serverless, I am a huge fan of. So less management, less overhead, less to do. And it simplifies the cost analysis as well. So definitely simplifies. And I would give this a 4 or a 4.5. I think I can do 4.5 because this is pretty straightforward.
Absolutely. And this has been a continuum, right? So it's not this in isolation, but this has happened over the course of many months of the preview release, the talking about it at reInvent, and so taking it in context.
Yep.
I wish they did quantify, like you said, how painful it was to administer your own OpenSearch or Elasticsearch cluster. So I'm glad.
I think anyone who's really done it understands it. So it's one of those universal truths of anyone who's dealt with sharding or managing large scale OpenSearch or Elasticsearch clusters. So yeah, I think that I'd say that's totally fine.
Perfect.
You don't have to state it again.
Well, let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about Porting Advisor.
Yep.
Public cloud costs going up and your AWS bill growing without the right cost controls? CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by focusing on AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe with zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. The best part? With your approval, CloudFix finds and implements AWS fixes to help you run more efficiently. Visit cloudfix.com for a free savings assessment.
All right, I just put this into the chat. This is the porting advisor for Graviton. So porting advisor. So we were big fans of Graviton. And so porting advisor is one bit of code that can help you know if your code is going to work on Graviton. And what it's doing is it's looking at, depending on the project, it's looking at your make files, your dependencies, the versions of tools you're using. It's even looking at, for C++ or C, it's looking at what compiler you're using, different compiler flags. So let's have an explore about what exactly porting advisor is. But the whole point of it is it's making it easier for you to transition to Graviton.
Yeah. So this one I am particularly interested in and excited about because program analysis is my field. And having spent well over a decade looking at different kinds of program analysis tools, I'm a huge fan of them. So what porting advisor basically does is it looks at your source code and helps you identify areas which might be red flags for porting into the ARM architecture. Okay. For the most part, when you have interpreted code and stuff like that, it really isn't an issue because you've got a JVM that kind of shields you from that. However, like in Java, you can make native calls. Similarly in Python and other languages that are interpreted, you have libraries that are wrapped in those languages wrappers. So but the core of those libraries are written in C, C++, Fortran. Like NumPy is a classic example of something that is under the hood, I think written in Fortran or COBOL, or
some of
one
the,
of those
the major
ancient languages.
The linear algebra libraries like OpenBLAS and that sort of thing, and
Correct.
LAPACK. I used to be an applied math undergrad a long time ago, and it's amazing when you look at how optimized. I mean, those libraries have been around longer than I have,
Right.
And all of the different linear algebra optimizations, exactly how to factor and decompose a matrix, and you wouldn't want to re-implement that in an interpreted language like Python. You'd want to leverage that several decades of work and research and call out to a lower level library. And this is taking advantage of things like vector operations in your particular CPU. But then, like I said, you run into that caveat of there's different CPUs out there that have different features.
Correct.
And so being able to say, can you move this workload from here to there? Well, that depends.
Exactly. So I think for the most part, I'd say for 90+% of or 95+% of scenarios, the porting advisor would work great for you. But the geek in my head kind of keeps, going to some very particular edge cases where I really wonder how they're doing this, or whether it would really satisfy all scenarios, given that you're also not looking to scan the binary files. Because one of the things that happens during certain kinds of optimizations that especially with C++ code, I don't know that much about Fortran, but C++ code in particular, there are certain kinds of optimizations that are brought in at the compiler level where you make certain assumptions about how your code is going to be written up in the assembly finally. And to make sure that that logic or that is compatible with the ARM architecture, that's a hard problem. That's an incredibly hard problem. And you'd probably need to look at the binary to be able to do that. I mean, at the source code level, it can only tell you that much because some of those instructions have different behavior, especially when it comes to comparators, assignments, and stuff like that. In C and C++ have different behavior on different platforms.
Well, let's look at one of the things that we were looking at earlier. This is the assembly language scanner, and it has this gruesome little regular expression in it. And I was looking at this last night. So, okay, this is kind of funny. I typed this into ChatGPT, this expression, saying, "What in the world does this mean?" And I said, so this is interesting. Explain this regular expression and give it to me in the context of x86 assembly language. And what it's looking for, this part of the regular expression is looking for register names. And it's saying x86 is looking for x86 register names, which usually start with R and then a number.
Right.
And then, see, again, this part it got wrong. This isn't R and then E. This is the character class R or E.
Correct.
So it didn't get it perfectly, but it got me on the right track. This one is looking for directives or instructions. And then you can look at the x86 assembly, and I kind of went down this rabbit hole for a few minutes of just, I've never written at that low a level. But it's interesting that this regular expression, again, it's not going to be perfect, but it's looking for, as it says, common instruction syntaxes. And then actually looking at this file, this still has the ARM copyright. So this porting advisor is a fork of a tool made by ARM Ltd. And they've added a lot of things to it. But yeah, it's neat to see how they do things.
I'm going to have to deep dive into this a little bit more. But if you have a tool that tells you whether your code is going to be compatible or not to switch over to ARM, and you can operate at up to 40% better price performance, I mean, this feels like an amazing step to get there.
Yeah. And like like you said, it's a really hard problem to solve. It's not going to be perfect, but it's over time they can add different heuristics in here, which are going to detect things that'll tell you, okay, this part isn't compatible. And usually it's probably going to be recompiling some underlying library with a different compiler flag, or just make sure you have the right version of the underlying library downloaded. And I've seen that before where there's like an ARM version of the library and an x86, but they have different names for historical reasons. So you have to modify your make file a bit.
Correct.
Yeah, but the big picture that you can run on Amazon native silicon and save 40%. Yeah, that is worth pursuing.
That's absolutely worth pursuing. And especially for enterprise software, like this has always been a huge challenge, right? You just don't know whether everything will work or not. And if a tool does static analysis and gives you a bunch of those answers, I mean, that goes such a long way. It's incredible. So it's just one more sign off that says, okay, I've looked at all of your code. There's a very, very high probability that this will just work. That's a big certification that comes with it.
So I think simplifies.
Definitely simplifies.
This is a no-brainer on that one. Simplifies. And the great thing, since it's open source, if you run into something that wasn't detected by this, open up a pull request, and so that way future people can benefit from something that you found. All right, what do you think of the rating itself?
I think I'd give this a 3 because while there's a link to the transition guide and stuff like that, there's too much to go through. Like, I would have loved a simple guide that says, why don't you try this on your existing GitHub repository? Like, there's 5 steps to try this out on your repo and get your answers. What would be even better is to figure out whether this, could you create a GitHub action to go do a test for it?
That's a really great idea, to have this bundled up in a GitHub action automatically run.
Correct. Or, something like a code commit equivalent to look at that. I mean, those are ways that make it easier for someone to try this out quickly, adopt it, and see if it works.
And one other little caveat, it does spell this out if you dig into the source. It's just doing a recursive scan of all files. So if you put in an offending assembly language file, even if it's not included in the actual build process, it's just sitting there in your repository, it's going to flag it as an issue. So it's not looking at any kind of semantics or structure or looking at the code path. It's just looking at a bucket of files.
Yeah. It's basically looking for a set of potential instructions that will show up once you translate it to ARM, because those instructions are known to have a different behavior. In fact, instructions are different, but if you've used those particular instructions, then you have to be particularly careful about what you're going to get on the ARM side of things.
All right. Well, anything else that
Okay.
we should say about this one? I think
this
it's
one is
covered.
clear.
All right. Well, let's have
Go on to the next one.
another break, and then we're going to talk about the simple monthly calculator.
Is your AWS public cloud bill growing? While most solutions focus on visibility, CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by finding and implementing AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe. There's zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. We've helped organizations save millions of dollars across tens of thousands of AWS instances. Interested in seeing how much money you can save? Visit cloudfix.com to schedule a free assessment and see your yearly savings.
Try that again. Okay, this is the simple monthly calculator estimates in the AWS pricing calculator. And so, what is this one? It's the main meat of the announcement. You can now convert previously saved simple monthly calculator estimates in AWS pricing calculator.
Yep. So the AWS pricing calculator is basically a tool where if you wanted to compute what it's going to cost you to run a particular application across all these different services, then it becomes it's almost like a Uber Excel sheet where you say, I need so many instances, I need so many CPUs, I need so much RAM, I need to run it for so many hours, my utilization is going to be so much. You give all, and then I'm going to buy these savings plans or whatever else. There are a lot of, because AWS pricing across different services spans so many different dimensions. How much networking are you going to use? How much data transfer is going to be there? What regions are you going to be in? Once you lay all of that out, then it gives you a rough estimate of what your costing is going to look like. We recently did an exercise of trying to cost out a solution that we were building with QuickSight and stuff. And the pricing calculator actually helped. I don't remember if it's pricing calculator, but one of the things that we discovered in this process was if we had used the way QuickSight pricing works is that if you're not doing a per user basis, that means you basically pay for every user who shows up on your account, and especially for open, websites where you have certain graphs and certain statistics shown. That just doesn't make sense because you're going to have a lot of people just come and look at the data and go. But if you had 2 tabs in that application and you had embedded QuickSight dashboards, then the pricing basically counts each visit to one tab as a session, and then you go to another tab that's a different session, and so you get charged a massive amount. Like, I think the cost estimate worked out to be 10x what we had anticipated it would be, and then we had to go back to the QuickSight team to figure out what we could do about it. But it helps to know and do these estimates. Again, it's part of the FinOps discipline that I talked about earlier. You have to go through the exercise of figuring out what you are likely to spend for the solution that you built, and then work through your alternatives or work through the approach of your architecture, your design, your commitments, your engagement with AWS on the different services, any private pricing that might come up. Like, there are so many options. Any savings plans you want to, subscribe to, all of those things. They all have to be part of the discipline of creating apps and deploying apps in the cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting the issue that you brought up about using QuickSight in a slightly different way could have amplified the cost so much.
Correct.
And that's one of the, I guess, pitfalls or areas of caution of pricing, is it can get complicated. And so you need a pricing calculator, because it's often different rates for different services that you're looking at. Like I was looking at on the intelligent tiering side, right? Things in the infrequent access tier, it's cheaper rate, but then you have the infrequent access surcharge. And so you have to keep in mind all of the different usage patterns that you might run into, and then think about what your average case is going to be, and then what your extremes might be. What happens if all of a sudden you have a 10x increase? Is it going to scale 10x, or is it going to be exponential? Is it going to be linear or exponential? You want
Exactly.
to know.
Yep. So I'd say this, and given that all of this is now, so you used to also have a simple monthly calculator, which is a very basic setup. That's now available in the AWS pricing calculator. So some of your old estimates and stuff like that you might have created and checked in or whatever, those are now available in the AWS pricing calculator as well. So that's pretty
And simple monthly calculator is getting retired. So
Correct.
March 31st is your last day.
I don't know if it's just me, but some of these retirement dates feel a lot closer than they used to be.
Yeah. Well, what was the one we were talking about last week? It was the retirement of the IAM actions.
Correct. There's the portal actions.
Yes. And that one they gave it to June, but March 31st, it's 2 months away.
Right.
And hopefully, and I haven't used the, I haven't tried to convert one to the other, but hopefully that's a straightforward process.
Yeah. I mean, this is a relatively straightforward one. It just takes a couple of minutes and you're done. So not a big deal, but, and I actually don't even know how many people actually use it. It's a good practice to do this whenever you're building any application. Don't try to deploy it and then say, oh, now I'm going to figure out what it's going to cost. I think one of the things that the well-architected framework tells you to do is to actually look at all of these aspects of cost. So go take a look at that as well.
The well-architected framework.
Yep.
Neat. Well, let's rate the simple monthly calculator. Let's see. And looking at that, they do give detailed migration instructions. They give a list of things that aren't supported, which are not too much, given the amount of Amazon SKUs that are out there.
Yep.
So it looks very straightforward. And like you said, this doesn't have a huge amount of usage anyway.
Correct. So I would give this simplifies, and I would give this 4.5 as well. You pick.
Oh, the 4.5.
Great. So I know our variance on our rating hasn't been that much. I think kudos to Jeff and his team, who've been doing a pretty amazing job of getting all this information in a very concise and digestible manner to the audience. So thanks again for doing that. And we look forward to more of these announcements.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming from a writing perspective, it's funny how you look at something that's simple and you think, okay, yeah, that's the simplest way of explaining that. But then when you try and write something, you just have this tendency to go towards complexity and try to write this, this magnum opus of content. And then you realize I might be the only person who reads it if this is how I write it. You have to simplify, and simplifying is hard. So echoing Rahul's statements, thank you for making it simple to read, to parse, and then yet having enough detail there that if you want to deep dive, it's going to be there, and it's going to be there.
Yep.
That's
and Jeff, if you're still listening on the show, we would love to have you here to just talk about how you simplify all this complexity that's coming your way, and how do you write it down in such a concise and digestible form. So we would love to learn a lot more from you on that.
Absolutely. All right.
Okay.
Well, this has been a really fun episode, and I think we're going to have the reoccurring poetry segment. I look forward to more of those. And Rahul, thanks again.
Thanks, Stephen. And we'll see you all very soon. Please drop us a note. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on LinkedIn, and let us know what you want us to cover in addition to what we are already doing. So we'd love to hear from you. We'd love your comments and feedback. And we will see you again next week.
Sounds good. See you again. Again, like and subscribe. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Is your AWS public cloud bill growing? While most solutions focus on visibility, CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by finding and implementing AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe. There's zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. We've helped organizations save millions of dollars across tens of thousands of AWS instances. Interested in seeing how much money you can save? Visit cloudfix.com to schedule a free assessment and see your yearly savings.